I'm in a meeting right now.
Okay. So I'm going to be presenting on JSON, the parse and stringify functionality of JSON. It's pretty simple. The purpose of JSON is it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Its purpose is basically to store objects and arrays as strings so they can be transferred between like different programs through the internet or whatever you want to do. It's basically a way to store objects and arrays in a lightweight format that's not specific to any one program. So it's a simple lightweight format, and it's readable by it's easily readable. It's just kind of intuitive just looking at it. So here are the parse and stringify functions. Basically, you declare an object using this notation, the curly braces, curly brackets for around the object, or square braces, square brackets around the around an array, and you put the quotes and the name and the commas in between. So here you have different things for the objects, or different things for the object, like you have a name, age, city, group, just different things to put data into the object. You separate the categories from the data with colons, and then you separate each of those things with commas, and you just separate things in an array with commas. And then basically what you do is once you've made that object, you just stringify it by with a stringify function. You just basically put it in a new variable that's just a string that contains that object and can then be parsed back into an object with the parse function like this. Yeah, it's pretty simple. Any questions?
What happens when you what really, I mean, what happens to that data when you stringify it?
It becomes a string. It becomes letters that can then be transferred wherever you want them to go and decoded back into an object.
So you could put them into a file?
Yeah, you could put them into you could just put them into a file as text and then translate them straight back into an object with a parse function.
Cool.
As I understand it.
Yeah, and then you can also take JSON objects from a file
and parse them with the parse function back into an object.
Yep, absolutely. So you can take the JSON format that's listed in a file and then put them into JavaScript objects.
You can stringify them and parse them.
Yeah.
Stringify them into strings, from objects to strings, and parse them from strings into objects.
Correct. Correct. Cool.
Yeah, I always really like the portability of objects in JSON format, because
I could basically stringify something, email you the string, and you could parse it back into an object.
You got it, exactly. It's very cool.
Yeah, for my for my project for this semester, I was considering using a database for my application, but I feel like I would be spending too much time on the database when that's not the purpose of the application. So what I plan on doing is storing the data in local files.
Makes sense.
I'm going to basically store them as JSON. Store them in JSON.
Right.
Yeah, it's awesome. In fact, you can store multiple JSON objects in a single JSON file. Really just like an object with an array of other objects in it.
Yep.
So you can, containerize it however you want. It's pretty
Yeah, I've got an array in this object right here in the example.
right. And each one of those elements inside that array can have another array.
right.
Yeah,
So
you can do that too.
yeah, it's pretty cool. You can nest them quite deep, as long as you know how to retrieve them once you.
I mean, that it could be tricky to get the notation right when you're nesting, like, or when you nest too much.
Yeah.
If you got like 5 layers of arrays in your object, then that may be a little excessive.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm not sure if
Kind of
there's
similar to XML. It's very similar to XML. Just the syntax is obviously a lot different.
cool. All right, we ready to skip on over to the DOM stuff?
Yeah, David, did you have any questions about that stuff?
Let's see. So can you only write JSON files through scripts?
No, you can type one if you wanted to. Yeah,
you could just type a string, type up a JSON file, and just convert it into an object. It doesn't have to have been converted from an object. It can, if the text is right, it can translate it.
Yeah, so you just
You can just write it down in that format, and it's an object once you parse it.
Yeah, you can just take a text file and write out the JSON. Write out the JSON in the JSON format, and then upload it into any application that will parse the file itself, and you're good to go.
Oh, okay. Can you make a JSON like out of a form?
What?
Yeah, you can store the data that you collect from the form on submit, which we'll talk about in a second, and you can basically just store that as an object and then output it in JSON and save it out to a file or do whatever you want with it.
Oh, okay.
Very handy.
Yeah, it sounds really handy.
It's like the CSV of web objects. All right. We ready to kick it over to the next thing?
I think so, man.
Okay. Did I turn my screen share off?
Yeah. Thank you, Maxwell.
Yeah, thank you. That was awesome. Okay. So here's me. Hi, I'm Dan McDaniel. I will be presenting 3 topics tonight. I'll be doing standard mobile JavaScript events, animations, and transitions, just touching on them briefly. And I have a little bit of a code example, but due to the way my page was set up, I didn't really do the animation very well, so I might have to come back and show you guys a better animation later. But let me go ahead and do my screen share here. All right, so this is what we're looking at tonight, and it's very sensitive. I have links out to the W3 schools pages for each of those if you guys want to copy this, or I could share it with you on Google, and then you could link out to it if you want to see more. But basically, we're looking at the standard JavaScript events, and specifically we're looking at the ones that are relevant to the mobile platform. I included on here some stuff about the keyboard and mouse, because those are very common things to do just in the browser, and we weren't supposed to stick strictly to mobile, so I figured I'd include that too. But these are the kind of the most common functions that I've seen in use on web pages, and I just included a small fraction of what's out there, but basically things that happen in the browser trigger events that can be wired up to code that you present. So what you would do is you would just say, like, when the onload occurs, I want a particular function to run. And the same would go for any of these other functions, or I'm sorry, any of these other events. So what's happening is there are built-in listeners in HTML that are picking up on these events that are handed off by the browser. And then what happens is your code will consume that and kick it over to your JavaScript for execution, and then you can do any kind of manipulation you want to. So the page functions are going to help you do things when the page first loads, or if there's an error, or if someone is showing or hiding the page and you want to do something while it's not visible or when it comes back into visibility. The mouse is going to give you the ability to do things that have to do with clicking or hovering over an item. The keyboard obviously is used for when you press a key down or up. This is very useful for games. If you wanted to use keys for different functions like movement in a game, you could use that. You can also use it for submission, and there's a lot you can do with the key up and key down. So speaking of submission, there's this onSubmit, which is also another function that has to do with like forms and data input and everything else. But so we've got the ability to like change the focus when we move from one field to another, and with that we can sort of like move. We can move like the focus of your, say, your validation or the highlighting or whatever else you have to go along with the cursor through the form. So that's what some of those are for. And then you have the ability to reset the form or submit it. So another thing we can do here is we can pick up on animations starting and going through each iterative motion and then stopping. And I'll explain a little bit about that a little bit later on. And then the same thing as the animations, but with transitions. When a transition ends, we can detect that, and that can be an event. And then we've got the events that come from a server. If there was an error sent from the server or a message, or if a connection was opened to a server, we can intercept all those events. And then there's quite a few miscellaneous events that are not categorized, but I found the two that are most interesting were the online and offline. So if you wanted to, say, detect in your page when it looked like the page was being loaded offline, say from cache, or if you knew that you were online and you wanted to handle things differently in those scenarios, you could potentially do something there. But the most important thing for this class are the class of events that surround touch events. And so we can detect the start of a touch event, the movement of a touch once it has started, the ability to detect the end of a touch, which is while it's still in the same object, or if it hasn't terminated, we lift up, or an on-touch cancel, which has to do with leaving the space where the object is, or otherwise canceling the touch by some external event like moving the page or navigating away from where you're currently at. So those are all the standard JavaScript events that I've seen used frequently. And I have an example of some of that stuff in just a minute. Not too much. I didn't get into trying to show every single one. But does anybody have any questions about this stuff before we go any further?
Is on-touch cancel triggered by the touch ending too, or is it just triggered if it cancels it in ways that wouldn't trigger on-touch end?
So on-touch end is basically a successful touch end, which means you touched in the area of an object and you released while you're still in it. So say, for example, you tapped on a button, right? And while you had your finger on the button, if you release, that's basically you confirming that you wanted to touch that button.
Okay.
But if you transition your finger out of it, what you're doing is you're canceling that touch event, saying effectively, I don't want to have touched that button.
Right.
Let go, it's okay. So that's the distinction between the two. All right. Anything else?
So, since it's like mobile events with the keyboard, you know how cell phones like normally raise up the keyboard when you're filling up a form?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there a difference, like, or a way to use the keyboard?
So I have found that on mobile browsers, it's very inconsistent. In fact, with web browsers in general, events and some attributes and even CSS, there are certain things that just do not work consistently from browser to browser. So I would say, like, if you're really targeting a particular user base, you should get to know exactly what they're using and then figure out the quirks of that particular setup. I believe that some of the mobile browsers do respond to on key down and on key up, but I haven't tested it. So yeah, that'd be something that would really be interesting to find out. I don't have any code that would find out right now, but I think we might have somebody in the group that has some code that's already kind of lined up for that. So
When you're talking about just for mobile, or are you talking about any browser on any device?
I was talking about specifically for mobile for
Okay.
this now, but
Okay, I was making sure you were talking about mobile and I was understanding everything you were saying.
yeah.
Cool.
But in general, I would also say there's very little consistency across browsers and platforms for any web browser. It's they just don't
Yeah, on any device.
very well to any standard. So, and I've run into this before where I've written pages and had them evaluated by a teacher who was running a different browser than I was,
Mm-hmm.
and it can negatively affect your grade if you don't know exactly what your professor is running. So,
Yeah, I think Brother James even said if your application is browser specific,
you're done.
then no, it's okay. He said just let them know what browser to use.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he said just let them know if it works in one browser and it doesn't work in the other. Just tell them which one it works in.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I did my commercial site and had an event where you clicked an image and that image kind of grayed out as your selection,
Mhm.
and it didn't work in Firefox, but it worked in Chrome because Firefox handled that event differently,
Right.
and yeah, that negatively affected my grade. So
I had the same experience I have. That's interesting.
yeah, must have been the same class. Were you in that class? Yeah.
I think I might have been in that same class.
Oh.
All right. So, any other questions about events? You guys know how to wire them up in HTML?
I think so.
Yeah, they're normally like attributes, right?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
sometimes
Just making
attributes.
another attribute of any of the elements in HTML that can respond to those particular events. And incidentally, if there's an event that you want to add the ability to respond to that it currently doesn't have, you can actually add custom event listeners. And I dabbled with that a little bit, but I didn't really have a lot of fun, so I just stuck to the basics. But yeah. Okay, let's move on. So animations. So animations are pretty cool. What they allow you to do is take any element that you have on the page and over a particular number of iterations or an interval, you can change the values, and then what it appears to do is animate it smoothly across the page, or maybe not so smoothly across the page. But the idea is you write a function and you grab your element, and then do it again. Then what you're going to do is define. You're going to use the set interval, and then call like a sub function that you create inside of the other function, and you basically tell it to repeat however many times. Oops, I did it again. And oh, I'm sorry. This should actually, I think this should actually be the interval, the duration, not the repetitions. But anyway, so what it's going to do is execute the code that you have in your animate function repeatedly until whatever this condition is for the set interval occurs. And so in this case, it was just moving a box by a certain number of pixels. It was moving it like across the page. I believe it was down and to the right. I'm just shifting it down the page. But
You're talking about W3 Schools example?
it's on the W3 Schools, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that one. It's a red box that moves across a yellow box.
Yeah, I'll show you guys.
Top left, from the top left corner to the right left corner.
It's pretty basic stuff, but well, that's not it. Is that it? No, that's not it.
No, you have to hit a button.
This guy? Yeah, this guy. So there's our red box, like Brooks was saying. And when you hit run, it just begins execution.
Actually, there's the other one. There's the next one that has a button. On another example of the same.
Oh, it's down here.
Yeah.
That's the one. That's the one, sorry. Okay, so here we go. So we got this button wired up. And you have an on-click event right here that says my move, click me, right? So when you click that, you fire off this on-click event, and so this button is going to call your JavaScript my move, which is what this is saying. It's saying I'm going to wire up the on-click event to my move function that's in your script. And so my code, I have my JavaScript in a separate file, but yeah, you can do it all inline if you want to too. So let's just see what happens when we click this. So you click here, and it just scoots across the page. And I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3. It's happening pretty fast. Yeah, I think this 5 doesn't appear to be a number of seconds. So maybe it's like number of frames. You guys know what that is?
I'm not sure.
Well, it's setting the interval.
So
I think the interval does it say frame?
yeah, it says frame. Their function is called frame.
Oh, okay.
So I guess they're saying that they're gonna do frame 5 intervals worth. I don't know. I guess that's worth looking up real quick.
There's other ways of setting the speed.
All right, so what do they say here? They say set interval method calls a function or evaluates an expression at specific intervals in milliseconds. Well, that's an awfully short millisecond period, 5 milliseconds. So yeah, so apparently that is a duration. And it should be animating it pretty smoothly if it's doing it at every 5 milliseconds. And let's see. Okay, and you can see here they're just incrementing the
Just a little bit at a time.
so yeah, one pixel shifts to the bottom and to the right at a time, and so that's why over the like if you only use 5 milliseconds, it seems to be pretty smooth. That's good to know. Okay, so back to this. So do you guys have any questions about how this works? Now that we've cleared this up, I can probably fix that.
So they're just manipulating the CSS class property of the position.
Yes, that's right.
During that interval.
Right, and you could, in theory, you can change just about anything that you want to that the object possesses, right? Like
Yeah, you could have it rotating as it's going down. You could have it changing color as it's sliding down. You could have it
Right.
adding a border, different border every time it slides down.
It's not there. Okay, so resume this. All right, so here's our transitions. Transitions I thought were really cool and very easy to implement. So basically what you're doing here, if you know how to do CSS, transitions are dead simple. So you take your element, you set it up like you want it, and you add this transition property to it. And so what you're going to do with this transition property is specify another property that will be manipulated, and the duration, and I think it's, well, I always put in seconds afterward there, but I guess you could probably do milliseconds too. You just specify the duration right afterward. Incidentally, I found that you can link these, and you'll see that in my code in a minute. You can link more than one property and duration in this same statement. You just separate them out on the same line. And then the next thing that you do is you define that same element and how it reacts to a particular event. So in the code below, you can see it's responding to a hover, but you could have it react to just about anything else, like a change of some other property, or another event that you're handling somewhere else. You can create a custom event and send it in, and it would respond to it. So, but what you do then is you tell it which property you want to use and what its new value should be. And so we have here, the background was originally red, and it's, let's see, now we go background is going to be blue. We have the original width was 100, now the new width will be 300. And
That's when you hover over that element, right?
That's when you hover over that element, right? And so you could do the same thing with a click. Any event that you can pass through the browser that's handled in CSS3, you can capture and handle this way. And it has some pretty cool effects too. The way that it looks is good. All right, so any questions about this? No?
Yeah, the transition.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, what is that? How does that interact with your hover?
So you'll notice everything up on the top right here, everything is in italics except for this word transition. That is the only word in this whole top area that is the literal word transition sitting in the code. And so what that's doing is it's just marking the property that we want to have react to an event. And so when you specify what it is afterward, you're just saying, I want the width property to be reactive, and I want it to take 10 seconds to respond to any event that triggers the reaction.
Okay.
So, and I guess that's kind of a weakness, because I don't know of a way that you can say, like, I want the width to react in 2 seconds if it's a hover, and in 5 seconds if it's a click. I don't think you can do that.
Okay.
But I can be proven wrong easily.
So basically what this is saying is that when you hover, the width is going to be changed during the duration of 10 seconds.
Correct.
From 100 to 300.
That's right.
And the background in a duration of 3 seconds is going to go from red to blue.
That's correct.
Okay.
So you would see the width take a lot longer than the transition between the colors.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And incidentally, when this condition, when the hover event terminates, it reverses the action over the same duration, which is pretty cool. So if it's an animation transitioning colors, it will fade from red to blue, and then when you mouse off, it'll fade back. It's pretty.
Oh, it'll go in reverse?
Yes.
Is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So the width will gradually transition back.
You got it.
And the color will gradually transition back. Okay.
Yes, indeed. So, anybody have any questions? You want to see how some of this is working on my page? All right, let's hop.
We don't want to see your example, buddy. No, I'm kidding. Of course.
Please, not again.
Let's take a look.
Okay, so this is on my local machine, but it is also uploaded to the Git repository. The links in the spreadsheet that we put together for the class organization. So you can run it on your mobile browser as well. One thing to note is I wired up the events here. These are the on-touches, on-touch cancel, on-touch start, on-touch move, and on-touch end. And I just set them all to have an alert. So if you're on your phone and you open this up, you'll see it will react a little bit differently than it does in the browser. I could, if I wanted to, I set up the on-click, and I had the same kind of thing happening where it would tell me a click event occurred, but I removed that because it doesn't work very well when you have both the on-click and the on-touch start. There's a way that you can do it, but you have to detect what browser you're using, and I thought that'd be a little bit overkill for what we're doing on this little demo, so I elected not to do that. But also, another thing that happened, we already were using this class checker for the data, individual data cells, right? And that was helping us get the right coloring and everything. So I just took advantage of that on the CSS, and you'll see here that I added the transition, right, for our background color. And you don't specify what color you're transitioning to here. So when I added the event, which is .checker hover, and I wanted to transition the background color to yellow and the color to black. So you'll see here I have the background color will transition in 2 seconds, and the color will transition in 5 seconds. So you'll notice that effect when I hover over here. So this is already loaded up in my browser, so I'll just show you. So if I hover over one, another, you can see they transition back pretty nicely. And they'll stop the transition as soon as you move off of them. So if you didn't make it all the way through the animation, they'll reverse from wherever they were.
Is the animation smooth on your computer?
It is. Is it not smooth on your side?
Yeah, it looks pretty choppy here, but
I think it is. I think it's just through the broadcast.
Yeah, probably. One thing to note that I picked up on here was when you're transitioning colors and you have something like a varying text color, it will transition from the current color to the color that it's going to, and that can affect like the aesthetic of it a little bit. So for example, like these are dark gray, so when they transition to black, and they're transitioning over the course of 5 seconds, they transition in what looks like a much slower progression than the bold white does. So the bold white looks like it's switching pretty quickly, but it's because it's passing through a wider sweep of colors. So if you were trying to optimize it, you might have to toy around a little bit with exactly what colors you wanted to use. And you might even be able to get really tricky and say, all right, well, if my color is a particular, if my text is a particular color, then transition at a different rate. But that is also beyond the scope of this demonstration. So, but that's basically it for this. Now, I have a mobile browser here too. And I think I haven't actually done this yet, but I think I can get it going for you. Incidentally, mobile, Chrome has a mobile browser built into the debugger, and if you are so inclined, you can go to the inspector and you can hack this into a little mini mobile browser, which is really nice. Oh, look, and I'm actually getting my events now. Oh, that's awesome. So I don't even have to show you on my mobile device. So, so when you click, you're basically signaling a touch event. And so I just clicked and I'm dragging, and then I drop. And if I go over here and click, I think what's happening is the alert is canceling the touch start, which, you know, whatever. But yeah, so you can see that those mobile effects are actually happening there. So it's pretty cool. This did take a little toying with to get to work. Yeah, so your mileage may vary, but it's definitely a lot better than having to test it on multiple devices. So I can reload that too. You'll notice too, though, that the hover does not occur because your finger basically is either touching or it's not, and there's no way of it knowing that you're hovering. So yeah, that is how it works.
Yeah, so Dan, I went to your site.
Yeah.
On my phone.
Is it cool?
I get the touch start alert.
Okay, cool.
Occasionally, what that does too, though, is it ends up highlighting the number.
Yeah.
It looks like I want to copy the number when I don't. But.
Yeah. And so that, I believe, is an artifact of the mobile browser that you're using, interpreting the finger as both a touch event and a mouse event. So there's a way that you can suppress that with an ignore, but I didn't code that in either. So what's essentially happening when you tap with your finger, it's registering it as a touch start, and it's also registering it as an on click. And so when it's an on click, as soon as the on click occurs, it goes, oh my gosh, now I have a mouse. And so obviously you have to be hovering over it for you to click on it. So then it triggers the hover event. So I don't know why when you take your finger off, it doesn't transition back out of it, but it doesn't.
Well, just so I can show you guys.
Yeah. Get out of my screen share here for you. Yeah, go ahead, Brooks.
Okay. So I hope you guys can see this well enough.
Oh yeah.
But well, let me. So there's the touch.
Right.
Right. And then transitions.
Yeah.
And then if I click another one, right, gives me the touch.
Yep. There you go.
There you go.
Right.
So the animation side of my code, though, basically I didn't really get it to do much because I was trying to adapt the code from W3 Schools, and that wasn't working out because the W3 Schools example had an object that was positioned way differently than the way that I did my positioning of my divs. So I wasn't able to move the individual cells the way that I wanted to have them animate. So in order for me to do that, if I really wanted to do it, I'd probably have to rethink the way I did the layout because I was trying to do that scaling where it would automatically scale to the size of the view frame. Anyway, so I put the code in there, but it's not doing anything right now. I'll probably tinker with it a little bit more.
Yeah, we're gonna meet Thursday.
Sweet, yeah. So maybe I'll have something to show you guys by then.
Cool.
Right on.
Anybody have any questions?
No.
No, I think I'm okay.
Cool.
All right. Well, I guess we'll end this glorious session then.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.